This is a video by Products USA, and we're going to be reassembling a DC-20 So here we go. We're going to start with assembling the airbag, the nut. So the first thing you want to do is make sure there's no cracks or anything in the airbag, and then push the nut in while the bolt is attached to it, and make sure it's in there good before you unfasten the bolt. And it's just like that. We're going to work on the pump housing. So the first thing you want to do is look at the pump housing in the inside, make sure that there's no scarring. If its scarring is light, you can use a standard auto honer to be able to smooth out the inside. When we're going to move up to the top side, so first thing, mount in a vise, and then we've got these grinding pits that we can sell you so that you can put some oil on them and then put them in. What this will allow you to do is to be able to clean up the inside of the pump seal. So just take a drill and you just, with a little bit of effort, so after you cone out all the different parts, clean everything out with mineral spirits and make sure that the ports are all clean of all metal shavings. So they look like this. We're next going to insert rams in the pump. First, make sure that the lower bearing is fully seated in the pump housing. Liberally oil the top of the assembly before you do anything else. Since each one could possibly be a different size, you gotta be real careful when setting up to figure out what's the right ram. So as you replace rams, basically you go in and you look and see whether any particular size works, and you try to put it in. And it'll take a little effort. Make sure you get it in. You make sure that the front edge doesn't catch on that lip. But what you really want is you want just a little bit of drag. This is the correct size, so you're after about this much drag, so very, very little drag, and then it goes in nice and smooth and nice and easy. So you want to do this for all three of the different pumps to get the right rams. Once the rams are all in place, you've got the right rams in. Before you can do anything else, you got to drop the lower washer in. It's good to put the spring guides in the pump head seals so that you can put those in together when you get there. At this point, you want to put the gasket on to the pump housing. Make sure it's all lined up and everything's good. Now, sometimes you forget to put it down before you go to put the pump together, and it's alright if that happens, because you can still put it on top before you connect the close the housing up. So this is the long spring. It goes into the ram. Make sure it's the delivery valve is the next one in. That goes in. Make sure you get a good seal there. So the delivery valve spring and the spring guide in the pump head seal. So those three pieces go in, and that slides right there and in place. So then you just gotta push it around on the edges to get it sealed in. So you use the ram set rings to hold all of these in place. So you push around the outside, get it pushed in. Once it's all set in, rotate the ring around so that everything's being held in place. Once all three are in, you can tighten up the seal rings once all three are together. And once it's all tightened up, then you put the needle valve in the center. So as you tighten this all up, you want to make sure that all of those seals are all in nice and flush, and so you'll have to do some adjusting with them to make sure that they're all nice and flush as you get the ring seals to close up. Just like that. Add a little bit of. So once they're all together, it should fully function like that. This is the needle bearing. It needs to go here in the center between the rams, so you got to adjust the rams enough to be able to get it in. Then there's a washer and a snap ring that goes on top. And once you get all of that, make sure the snap ring's in the groove so that it's not going to be coming out. And that's how you put the pump together. So once that's all done, the pump's all together. Then in this case, because we didn't put the gasket on before, we're putting the gasket on right here. Install the oil seal in the pump case. You just have to press it in to get it in. Then you just gotta install the ball bearing in the pump case to do that. You have to press it in with a force to get it installed, but there you go. The armature can be cleaned up basically using sandpaper and in this case a lathe to clean up the contact so that it's all taken care of. Make sure the ball bearing on the end of the armature so we can easily clean up the armature and make sure that everything's smooth and ready to go. Next, place the pump case over the pump. You come in contact with the ram set rings. Once you do that, then you can remove the ram set rings and slide the pump case down all the way over. This way the pump case covers half of the pump before the pump case rings are removed. You gotta make sure it's nice and solid. You see that it covers half before just close it down. You've got the gasket between it, and everything there is pretty good. So the next thing to do is to install the armature. So put oil into the center and put oil on the armature. Then you install it into the needle valve, but it's not going to go all the way in. So then what you do is you tap it lightly on the top while spinning, and eventually it should start to pop down and slide down into the needle valve. So you just keep doing that until you got it down far enough. Make sure that the fan's not in contact with anything, and works just like that. So we're just wiping off any excess oil or anything that might be on the outside of the armature. You just slide the motor housing on, tap it on so that the rear bearing drops into the rear of the housing. Once you do that, then you get to move to putting the bolts in that will attach the pump and the housing and the protectors all together. So you go and you do that, you're pretty much set. So you put the carbon brushes in and then the cover on over the top to hold them in place. So you just the airbag set bolt has a vent hole that goes through the center, so you need to make sure that that vent hole is clear before using it. If not, you may have to drill it out. You slide the airbag into the bottom of the housing and then just screw in the airbag set bolt to the airbag to hold the airbag in place, and that'll be all set. Need to make sure that the seal on the end of the piston's in good shape. This one has been damaged due to the wrong oil being used. So you also want to work on the return valve, make sure that the springs are in good order, that it's fully functional. It's good to make sure that the spring is plenty tight on the release, so in this case we just use a pair of pliers to push the spring down, make sure the spring's tightly seated on the release valve. After oiling the piston, check and see if the piston binds in the housing. Minor abrasions on the piston can of course be smoothed out with a band sander. It's always good to clean up the tip of the piston to try to, since it usually does get marred on used tools. So a belt sander to try to make sure that it's all smoothed up, and then a grinder to polish it all up. Make sure you get all of the edges or cleaned off of any burrs. Make sure it slides in and everything's good. There's seal packing that needs to go into the housing, so you need to install that. You also need to make sure you place the cylinder packing onto the end, and then you want to install the piston spring, so the return spring gets added to the housing. Once all of that's done, you put the keyway into the piston. Make sure that that fits nice and solid, and once all that's done, guess what? We can put the piston finally into the housing, get it all set in there, right there. You need to use the C-clamp to push the piston through, and then be able to use an Allen wrench through the piston to hold it tight. I want to replace the seal packing ring on the piston. This one, of course, deteriorated because of the oil. There's a groove on this ring. You want to make sure that the groove is facing to the outside of the piston when you go and push it on. Add some oil to the inside of the cylinder before mounting to the housing. So slide it on, push it on a little bit off the bottom, and then slide on the top, and just work the whole thing down so that it seals down tight. Once that's finished, you can start installing all the bolts on the front of the housing. So you get all those bolts installed, tighten everything up, go and tap the Allen wrench out so that the piston closes up, install the cutting blocks. We use BN hydraulic fluid 7356, which is a Tellus 68 20 weight, anti-foam and anti-graphite. So you fill it to the top once full, plug the hole with your finger, cycle the piston by pulling the switch for just a few seconds. Then you go and you fill up the tool with more oil, and you'll send the piston out for a little bit more. Continue to do that again. The object being is you want to send the piston out to just before it's going to return. Make sure that the tool is fully full with oil. At that point, then you're going to put your finger on the plug the hole, and you'll cycle the tool out. So till it retracts. As it retracts, you just crack your finger off the hole, let oil and air out. Push the piston out. Do it again. So repeat that 5-6 times as necessary till you get trying to get all the air out of the tool. Sometimes you have to add more oil to make sure that it's fully full of oil, but you do that over and over again. So you're after trying to make sure there's no more air bubbles coming up out before you tighten up the bolt. Put the bolt in and tighten it up. So as you can see, it looks to be pretty good. No air bubbles. So you can tighten this up. Grab the wrench, tighten it all up, and it should be in good shape. So of course the last step of any rebuild is to make sure that the tool cuts rebar successfully and it does better than what the tool came in. So it's always good to be able to put it in a protective place so they protect your eyes and from chips, and just cut multiple cuts with the tool. And once you do that, it's easy to see that the tool's in good shape. So this is a BN20 rebuild. So hope it helps.